readers, book lovers, and anyone else who's watching this. I'm Emily at Midnight. Welcome to my channel. I'm just getting my channel started, so I thought it might be nice to start with a breakdown of books I've read in recent years. I'm going to start by breaking down books that I read in 2021. Fun fact, I discovered Goodreads in 2020 because of a roommate who was aghast that I hadn't heard of it. And I'm really grateful to her because I'm pretty sure everyone goes through that period of time where they kind of forget that books exist. I've noticed most people that I talk to that feel this way, it happened like right at the end of high school and the beginning of whatever comes next, whether it's college or working or, whatever the next stage is, you kind of just lose reading in the cracks. I have a personal theory that it's because when we get assigned so many books in high school and then later in college, for those of us that go on to college, we just get absolutely bogged down with reading and it becomes like a chore. And so we stop doing it because boo, no one likes homework. And that's what happened to me. So there were a couple years where I just didn't read much of anything at all. So in 2020 during lockdown, my roommate introduced me to Goodreads and I loved it so much I went back and logged every single book that I'd ever read as far as I could tell. Like going back to elementary school, I have like a bunch of picture books on there and stuff. It was just a really fun way to like remember how much I loved reading, and it got me back into reading. And so starting about 2021, I was reading a regular amount of books rather than a I hate reading amount of books. And so I thought that's a great place to start. So we're starting in 2021, looking at the books that I've read. I divided the books that I read in 2021 up into 4 categories: fiction, memoirs, romance, and graphic novels. So we'll dive in with the fiction first. The first book that I read in the fiction category is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I don't own a copy, so I'll put one somewhere. I've been hearing about The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne for like my entire life, as I think everyone else has been, and so I finally decided to read it, and I was a little bit disappointed, to be honest. I'd had it talked up so much as a critique on purity culture and misogyny and the patriarchy that I think I expected more of it than it was going to give for a book written by a man in the 1850s about a woman who got pregnant out of wedlock, if that makes sense. It wasn't bad, it was pretty good, and honestly probably revolutionary for its time, but living in 2021, as I was when reading it, it wasn't everything that I'd been told it was going to be. And so that's probably a little bit more on me and my expectations. I was disappointed that the best parts of the book seemed to be readers' interpretations of the book and not from the book itself. Okay, next up in the fiction category, we have Cinder by Marissa Meyer. I loved this book. It was such a lovely retelling of Cinderella. It was a book recommendation from a friend, and personally I don't think I would have ended up reading it if it hadn't been, just because I've read so many Cinderella retellings. But this is one that really doesn't try too hard. Like, it sprinkles in a lot of those Cinderella story aspects, but it has enough of its own story to tell that I didn't feel like I was reading a book I've read a million times before, if that makes sense. There's this wonderful sci-fi and fantasy element to it. It's part of the Lunar Chronicles series. I actually read book 1 and 2 in 2021, and I just really fell in love with the whole series storyline. There's so much that happens in Cinder, but then obviously the overarching story of the Lunar Chronicles kind of carries the whole series and makes you forget that they're fairy tale retellings. So Scarlet, obviously a Little Red Riding Hood retelling. And I'll hold it up a little longer. It's really lovely as well. The romance in this one is a lot more passionate, I would say. Not spicy, just passionate. And that was really fun, but I also love the slow burns of some of the other books in the series. Yeah, overall, really, really loved that series. I only read the first 2 in 2021, though, so I'll only talk about them. Moving on, I read The Life of Pi by Yann Martel, and I'm pretty sure it's one of those books that doesn't need any introduction at this point. It's been famous for a while. There's been a movie made out of it. But if you haven't read it, I won't spoil it for you. Life of Pi was a book I didn't actually get into intentionally. In fact, it's one of the first books that I read in 2021 because I was complaining to my brother about how the car that I had at the time only had a CD player and I couldn't play music any other way. And at the time, I didn't own very many CDs. And so he happened to own the audiobook for Life of Pi and just gave it to me. And I was like, okay, I'll read this random book that I've heard so much about. And I ended up loving it. I devoured it so fast that I found myself just taking random little car rides to listen to the rest of it, which is a little inefficient, but we'll worry about that another day. I loved the storytelling, the incredibly creative plot, but I don't know if I was strong enough for the ending, and I still don't think I am. Without spoiling it, there's a couple possible endings for how it really went down, and I'm delusional and like to think that it's the best way possible. So if you want a breakdown of Life of Pi, maybe I can do another video of it and how I think the first ending really could be the real story. Next up, we have The City of Ember by Jeanne DuPrau. It was just a reread from my childhood. I hadn't touched the book in a long time and came onto my radar again, and I was like, okay, I'll reread it, why not? And I really loved it. The colors, the immersive world, it drew me in instantly, even though I had read the book before. The characters are so interesting and attention-grabbing, and the mystery of the world is just so compelling, doesn't matter how many times you read it. Next, we have Memoirs. The first memoir that I read was The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, and this was actually the first time that I picked up this book, and I was pleasantly surprised. Knowing her story, I definitely thought that I was going to be going into a concentration camp novel, and the book actually takes place 100% before the concentration camp while they're in hiding. And as you know, it's her diary, and I guess I was very surprised just by how positive the outlook is. Not in that the situation is positive, but that no matter what situation we're placed in as humans, we keep on living as humans. And that's definitely the main takeaway that I got from this. It's a story that humanizes everyone who experienced the atrocities of the Holocaust, because Anne writes her story very much as any other 14-year-old girl would. Her diary takes the numbers and the history of the Holocaust and makes it personal. Her diary changes the Holocaust from a history lesson to the horrific murder of a friend. And I think that's the impact that books telling the history of the Holocaust are meant to have. The next memoir is The Polygamist's Daughter by Anna LeBaron and Leslie Wilson. This book had me in a chokehold and didn't let go until I was finished. I was literally reading it in the bathroom in the middle of the night at my in-laws' house. It's a memoir about Anna LeBaron, who is the daughter of the head of a polygamist cult in the Western United States and Mexico. And if you've heard of the sect, then you have spoilers for the story. If you haven't heard the name LeBaron before reading this book, then you, like me, will be very surprised for the journey and the ride that book is. The storytelling is very compelling, and Anna's life is just wild from start to finish. Next we have First They Killed My Father, A Daughter of Cambodia Remembers by Loung. First They Killed My Father is to this day one of my favorite books that I have ever read. It's a memoir written by a woman who lived through the genocide carried out by the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Loung writes a visceral and harrowing tale of her experiences and the experiences of others who lived through the Cambodian genocide, including the atrocities that happened to her own family. If you're looking for a book to kickstart your personal journey into studying history, which is what I was hoping to do, this is definitely the right book. It plunges you into different aspects of world history that you might not have had covered as much as you would wanted in school. I did make a mistake when reading this book, however. I was, as I've mentioned with Life of Pi, in the habit of reading books in my car. So anytime I would drive anywhere that was more than a couple minutes away, I would listen to it. And I just so happened to be reading this book when I was driving an hour and a half away for a friend's bachelorette party, and I might have finished it on the way there, and let's just say I don't recommend that unless you want to be late because you spent 15 minutes crying in the car before going into a bachelorette party. So keep that in mind. Next, we have a much more lighthearted one. We have The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. This book is based on Sherman's own life, but it's told about a boy named Junior. It's a funny, heart-wrenching, and heartfelt comedic memoir about a boy who grew up on the Spokane Reservation in Washington State in the US. It details the struggles of Junior with his own body being unusually small for his size as a child, and then later with his identity in high school as school takes him off the reservation. It's delightful, it's fun, it's funny. I really enjoyed it. There's also adorable little cartoons written in the pages. So it's definitely a book that I enjoyed, and it was fun to get a peek into a life that I have very much not experienced, and the struggles of being from two cultural backgrounds. The next book is Memoirs of a Geisha. So this is by Arthur Golden, and I'm putting it with the memoirs, even though technically, contrary to the title, it's not a memoir, it's well-researched fiction. I have mixed feelings about this book. The storytelling, the characters, the plot, the colors of the story all drew me in, and I finished it in a matter of days despite being a full-time college student who was also working. On the other hand, I'm aware of the controversy around books like this, as they're very much not own voices stories. I don't personally think that every book written has to be written by someone who experienced that thing, otherwise we would never get fantasy, and we would lose a lot of fiction. However, I was definitely shocked as a reader when I realized, it took me a ways into the book to realize that it was not written by a retired geisha, as the name suggests, nor was it written by a Japanese person or a woman at all, but by a white man named Arthur Golden. He did do a lot of research into it, and you can tell it's in my opinion, definitely, it feels respectful. It feels like it's written about a group of people that he admires and the experience and the struggles of those people. However, I don't personally know enough about it to know what he got wrong. And so the best I can say about it is it was enjoyable, but I don't know exactly how to feel about it overall. I do think that he did a wonderful job with the book. It felt very respectful and told many aspects of a geisha's life that I would never have known of otherwise. I do think that it's a little sad that the book with the best advertising is a book written by someone who has no connection to the story. If you are looking for a book similar to Memoirs of a Geisha, but that was written by someone within that same culture, I would recommend Beasts of a Little Land by Juhea Kim. It's a book about a Korean courtesan, which is in many ways a counterpart to a geisha, and it tells the experience of this courtesan, and I really enjoyed it. So that's my recommendation to you. And we're on to romances. The first romance that I read in 2021 was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I loved this book. I clearly loved it enough to buy it. That's a fun fact about me. I usually get books from the library and read them that way, or listen to the audiobook, and then if I like them enough, then I will add them to my personal library. So, Turtles All the Way Down was lovely. Somehow I managed to miss John Green's books in high school, despite them being all the rage and being currently made into movies while I was in high school. Really not sure how that happened, but I really loved Turtles All the Way Down. Ava is the main character, and she has OCD, and I will say John Green does an amazing job of depicting mental illness. In many ways, it was a little bit overpowering for me as someone with anxiety. I ended up having to read Turtles All the Way Down in spurts and kind of take some breathers in between, and so I do kind of wish there was a little bit of a trigger warning there, because Ava's mental illness is very intense, and I think at the time that I read it, I was not in as good of a place as I would have wanted to be. All things considered, though, I still really enjoyed the book. Next up on the list is Looking for Alaska by John Green. I really loved this book. It was just really fun. It definitely captured the whimsy and anxiety of being a youth, the struggles of trying to fit in and find friends and just exist as a teenager. I've never been a teenage boy, so there were some aspects of the book that I really couldn't relate to that much, but it wasn't in such a way that I felt alienated by the book, so that was nice. Overall, I really loved the book. I laughed so much, and yes, I cried a ton at the end, but yeah, it was a really enjoyable book for me. The next book I read was XOXO by Axie, and I just now realized that her name sounds like the title of the book, which I think is lovely. Full disclosure, I don't really remember this book that well, but I remember liking it a lot. The basic plot, if I remember correctly, is a Korean-American girl goes to live in Korea for maybe a summer or something and ends up falling in love with a K-pop idol. I remember thinking that the romance and chemistry was cute, but that the plot felt a little Wattpad-y. For the sake of a romance novel, I'm generally the kind of person that can suspend my disbelief that a celebrity will fall in love with just our specific random person that we're following around. But I will say that the resolution of the plot was something that was a little hard for me to get on board with. It was basically just a grand gesture that against all odds they decided to get back together, but it was the odds that they were against that made it make no sense at all to me. Basically, from what I remember, they were going to be living on 2 completely different continents for the next 2 years and couldn't date according to certain rules, and maybe wouldn't be seeing each other for 2 more years, and they're 16. And basically, it just felt like that's nice and cute and all, but too bad they're going to break up anyway. Next, we have the graphic novels. Prior to 2021, I actually had never picked up a graphic novel in my life. So this was a fun change, and I've discovered a genre that I really enjoy. Actually isn't a graphic novel. I just put it in this category because I want to talk about it and I can do whatever I want. So the first one is The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. It's just a picture book. It's one of those books that most people read in their childhood. I somehow missed it. And so I picked it up because my roommates were talking about how much they loved it in their childhood. This might be a little bit of a controversial take, but honestly, I didn't love it. It might be me reading too much into a children's book, or it might be the fact that I don't have that nostalgia on my side, but I just definitely felt like the moral of this story was not something that I'm super in favor of. Again, maybe this is me reading too much into it, but I felt like the moral of the story was saying give and keep giving of yourself to make someone else happy until you literally die in the process. I don't know. Tell me if I'm reading too much into that. Feel free to comment that you disagree with me or whatever, or if you agree. I would love that. Up next, we have American Born Chinese by Jeanne Luen Yang. This is a lovely graphic novel that's actually currently being made into a movie, so that'll be really fun. American Born Chinese is really lovely. It's a memoir about a young boy growing up in America. He's Chinese American, and it really explores his struggles of trying to find his identity in a world where he feels torn between 2 different cultures. And like many such stories, they use superheroes as metaphors throughout the book, but unlike many such stories, they actually use Chinese myths and superheroes. So my friend gifted me a copy just in time for this video so I can show you some of the panels. It's really lovely. You can see a lot of the traditional Chinese stories depicted on the panels. As I just knocked my microphone off. Sorry friends, I just knocked my microphone off. But yeah, you see some of his experiences in high school, as well as the more mythology-based stories that are happening at the same time. The next graphic novel is also a memoir of sorts. It's Little White Duck, A Childhood in China by Na Liu. This graphic novel is a series of vignettes from the author's childhood growing up in China, and it shows the pleasures and the struggles of growing up under Mao's regime in China. I actually found it a little bit hard to place the targeted age for this book. A lot of the stories carry some intensity that I would expect to be targeted at an older audience, but at the same time, the content is friendly for younger children as well. Ultimately, I think teens and adults will probably get the most out of it because they'll be able to pick up the nuances of the history and the individual aspects being told in the stories. I really loved the book, and I think it did a really great job of showing what that experience is like living in China at that time. And as we know, there's no better teacher than experience, and so reading that secondhand experience was lovely. Up next is one of my favorite series. So I read the series A Bride's Story by Kaoru Mori. She's a Japanese artist and author, and I actually read books 1 through 8. I only own books 1 through 3. So I'll be showing you them, but they're really, really lovely. You can see the detail even just on the covers of these, like, look how many sheep. So the series takes place on the Silk Road in the 19th century, starting in the East with a young woman named Amir, and she gets betrothed and ends up going to live in the city with her betrothed and his family. Well, in a town, not really a city. I don't know what would have classified for a city back then. But the first few books follow her exclusively, but then as we go on, we follow other people further down the Silk Road, as well as checking back in on Amir's story. It's really fun. You just get to know more and more people as it goes on. Something I would really love to highlight is just the detail with which Kaoru Mori told these stories. The panels are just beautiful. You can see this one's a fox hunt, I believe. Just incredible, incredible art and detail. Like, just look at her clothes. I love it. It's really incredible because Kaoru Mori went and explored a lot of these areas, traveled there, interviewed people, and so they are very well researched and do an excellent job of showing what things were really like at that place at that time along the Silk Road. And at the same time, she tells such interesting and wonderful stories that it's a delight. And I cannot find one of the panels that I want to show you. Found it. So each book has just some of these absolutely beautiful, detailed depictions of different things. This is, I think, embroidery, and other books show woodwork and bread designs that they make, and you can just tell the detail and the amount of research that Kaoru Mori went into to put out these books, and I'm just really appreciative of someone who puts that kind of time into educating others in such a fun and interesting way. The next series that I read was Olympus by Rachel Smythe. I think that's how you say her name. I read books 1 and 2, which at the time that I read it were listed on Goodreads as not a book before their title, which I thought was really funny. The reason they did that is because they were originally webtoons, but now at least 4 volumes have been published in actual books, so it's a book. And I'm including it here. Olympus, if you haven't heard of it, is a charming retelling of Hades and Persephone, and unlike other retellings and myth stories, it doesn't take place in that time. It doesn't take place in Greece or anything like that. It takes place in the modern day, and so it brings a lot of like modern challenges and storylines that they're able to include, as well as introducing a lot of other lesser gods and their plot lines, and it's really wonderful and intricately woven. It stays true to basic characteristics of gods, but weaves completely new tales with them, which I just love. Just for fun, here at the end, I wanted to include some graphs made by Storygraph. The first one shows that I was very generous with my ratings and read a lot of books that I loved in 2021. I gave mostly 4-star ratings and more 5-star than 3-star. Then we have the moods of the books that I read. We can definitely tell I was reading emotional, adventurous, and reflective books with some of these other moods in there as well. This one's just in here for kicks and giggles. I thought it was really funny that we have not a book here on this chart. So Kaoru Mori wrote A Bride's Tale, we have John Green, we have Marissa Meyer, and then not a book because of Olympus being classified not a book at the time. We have the breakdown of fiction versus nonfiction, which I'm sure you were already able to gauge. I read mostly fiction. And then the page number graph as well. We can see that I read mostly books that were less than 300 pages, which I feel like is pretty common, especially when you're reading a lot of graphic novels. I just think these are interesting, so I thought I would include them. I don't know if you'll find them as interesting as I did. Overall, I might have missed a few books, but that's mostly the books that I read in 2021. And if you want a deeper dive into any of these specific books or series, feel free to comment that below, and I will make another video on any of these books. Thanks so much for watching the first video on my channel. If you liked it, please hit the like button down below and subscribe while you're down there. Have a wonderful day, treat people with respect, and pick up a book.